My sister stole my baby, and only now did I learn that her blue-eyed son, the boy I baked pies for and called my nephew, was mine. The text came at dawn, a polite call from a DNA website I'd forgotten I'd registered. Parent-child match, 99.99%. His profile picture had the same smile he'd had in my wedding photo, the same light eyes my mother called winter water. By noon, I was at my sister's kitchen table, telling her about DNA. "It's a mistake," she said, covering the screen with her hand. "These websites do everything wrong." I pulled the printout closer. "Say his name," I told her. My voice surprised me, even like helping a child out of a dark room. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the blue bowl in the sink. "We did what we were supposed to do," she whispered. "What you had to?" I heard my chair scrape back. "I was 17, scared, and you told me signing those papers meant he'd go to a family in another state. You made me promise not to look." She flinched. "I was trying to save you." She meant save the family's reputation, save her marriage after the second miscarriage, save the tidy story we told at church. He toddled through my living room. I taught him to tie his shoes. At 15, he asked me why his eyes were the only blue ones in the family. And we laughed. We laughed. "How many birthdays did you let me hold my own child and not tell me?" I asked. She finally met my eyes then, and for a second I saw the girl we used to be, the one who shared a bed with me in winter, the one who swore we'd never lie to each other. "Mum made me," she said. And then it was too late. He knew me as his mother. Her mouth trembled. "I thought you moved on." I moved on like someone moves on from a shipwreck, hands always counting for missing pieces. Was every silence in our family a plan? How could my own sister watch me grieve at a graveside we invented? I folded the pages one by one. I had already saved the screenshots and the hospital records. I had already set an appointment. With a lawyer, yes, but also with him. He's a father now. I have seen the stroller in his trunk and the soft way he carries it. He deserves the truth, and I intend to put it in his hands myself. They think I'm too old to start a fire. But I have learned that a grandmother's patience is not the same as surrender. But to understand how it all happened, I have to go back to the beginning. I was 17 the summer the corn grew so high, the road narrowed to a ribbon. I kept a cardigan buttoned in August, hunger and shame sharing the same small room in my chest. Our mother said we didn't air laundry in public. Our father said very little. My sister, 7 years older, married the year before, started coming by with casseroles and advice. "Sign the papers," she told me, quiet in my bedroom, ceiling fan turning slow. "You'll thank me when you're 20. She had a way of talking like every choice was a lesson she had already learned. The hospital was 2 towns over. I remember the linoleum smelling like lemon and bleach, the nurse with grey hair who tucked my hand back into the blanket when I tried to reach. No one asked me to hold him. I heard him cry, a gull cry far away, and then the door closed. The papers came on a clipboard with a pen attached by a chain. "It's better this way," our mother said, eyes on the crucifix above my bed. "A nice family. They can give him what you can't." I signed because everyone expected me to. I signed because I was 17 and needed someone to tell me it wouldn't always hurt like that. Weeks later, my sister said a cousin in another county knew of an adoption. "It's a sign," she told me, lifting her chin toward the sky like she owned the heavens. "God's giving us a baby." People brought quilts and onesies. I sat on the porch while they unwrapped gifts in my mother's living room, my hands folded so tight my nails marked crescents on my palms. When they brought him home, I stood in the doorway and told myself his eyes were just the color of summer. People would say later that he had my smile. I would laugh the way people laugh when they don't want to cry. I left the next year. Night classes, a receptionist job at an auto body shop where the phones rang like small alarms. I sent birthday cards addressed to my favorite nephew and baked dinosaur cakes with frosting that stained our tongues. I told myself I was building a new life. But every time he burrowed into my side on the couch, every time he slipped his small hand into mine to cross the street, something in me both healed and broke. You learn to fold your pain like laundry. I married a good man who loved quiet and fixed clocks. We couldn't have children after a while, and we built a life out of weekends at the lake and church potlucks and the routine tenderness of ordinary days. My sister's boy, my boy, grew tall and serious. He called me Aunt Lena, and later, when I became a widow, he came by to change the porch light and carry boxed books to the church sale. I never asked my sister how the adoption worked. She never offered. We grew practiced at stepping around the hole in the middle of the room. Then came the fad of spitting into tubes. My quilting circle did it for fun to see who's Irish and who's not. I mailed mine on a Tuesday with a book of bird stamps and forgot about it. The result pinged my phone weeks later while I was making tea. Parent, child match. For a moment I thought the site was telling me something impossible, like I had developed a second heart. The truth, when it comes, does not whisper. It rings. After the kitchen table scene, after she said, "We did what we had to," I went home and spread my records on the dining table like maps. The hospital file I'd requested years ago when I thought nostalgia might be safer than it is. Admission time, birth time, discharge. No adoption agency listed, no out-of-state transfer, just my name, and a signature that was mine but also not, the awkward, frightened S's I made at 17. Beside another hand I knew too well, my mother's. My sister's husband, Carl, had signed a witness line. I lingered there. Carl was 22 when I was 17. All elbows and loud opinions back then, our town's varsity legend who sold insurance on weekdays and memories on Friday nights. He married my sister the spring I started high school. He was in our kitchen as often as coffee. After I gave birth, he hovered at the edges, taking out trash that didn't need taking, driving errands no one asked him to. Once, when I was dozing, I woke to find him standing in my doorway. He said he'd heard the baby. The baby was gone. It took time to admit what the timeline might mean. A woman learns how to be suspicious of her own memory. But if there's one thing widowhood had taught me, it's how to sit with a hard question until it looks back. Whose idea was it to keep the baby in the family? Why had Carl signed those papers? Why did my sister talk about saving me in a voice that sounded like saving herself? I needed one thing before I did anything else. His face. Not the pictures on holiday cards, not the cautious smile of a middle-aged man who hates cameras. I needed to look at my son and watch him breathe. I sent him a message through the DNA site, plain as rain. I believe I'm your mother. If you'd like to talk, I'll be at the Willow by Lake Mercer on Saturday at 10. If not, I understand. I will never contact you again. I didn't sleep much that week. I boiled eggs I didn't eat, and organized drawers that didn't need organizing. On Saturday, I packed 2 bottles of water and a stack of napkins, for no reason I can explain. The lake was cap grey in the morning. Geese made their usual rude comments, and a jogger trotted past with her hair in a long rope. He came. He was older than the boy I carry in my mind, of course. 55. A teacher's crease between his eyebrows. a leather jacket he'd worn too many years to give up. He stopped 10 feet away like the ground between us was a border. "Is this some kind of scam?" he asked. No hello, just the truth, straight out. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. "I wish it were," I said. "It would be easier on everyone." He looked at my hands. When he finally came closer, the wind lifted his hair, and there it was, winter water blue. "I don't know what to call you," he said. "Aunt Lena?" The words cut me, but I didn't bleed. "Lena is fine," I said. "You can call me whatever feels safe today." We sat on the bench. I had rehearsed 100 speeches, and then I threw them away. "I was 17, I said. "Your grandmother, the only one you knew, told me if I signed you'd go to a family far away. I would never see you again. Then your parents, my sister and her husband, adopted a baby. And I told myself life is strange but sometimes kind. I swallowed the suspicion because that's what girls learn to do." I stopped. The wind moved the willow in a long sigh. He didn't look at me. "I thought my birth mother was a ghost somewhere," he said. "An idea. I didn't think she was a person who taught me to tie my shoes." He laughed then, one short sound like a cough in an empty church. When I got the match, I shut my laptop and stood in the garage for 15 minutes. I kept telling myself it was a glitch. Then I saw your eyes in my own face. We talked for an hour, and then 2. He told me about his daughter, about the baby who had made him build a crib late one night with his phone propped on a chair, instructional video on pause. He told me about his childhood, about how Mum, that was my sister, labelled every school photo with neat block letters, about how Dad, Carl, yelled at umpires and made perfect pancakes. At one point he turned to me so quickly the bench creaked. "Who is my father?" he asked. There it was, the question I had circled all week and not dared to touch. "I don't know," I said. "I can tell you who it isn't. A boy my age. I can tell you your grandmother didn't want me seeing anyone then. That's not an answer." He nodded. He was quiet a long time. "I loved my childhood," he said finally. "I love my parents. That doesn't cancel the truth." He rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand like it hurt. "I need to know. Not to punish someone, He looked at the lake. "I want to know where my face comes from." After we stood, and he hugged me, it was brief and careful, the kind of embrace that holds a body and a question at once. He said he wanted to talk to his parents before we told anyone else. I told him I had no interest in burning down his life. "I'm not here to throw matches," I said. "I'm here because we were already standing in smoke." When I got home, I found the old cigar box in the back of my closet, the one my husband had used for loose screws, and I had used for letters I didn't read. At the very bottom, under a program from my father's funeral, and a receipt for a stroller I bought in 1970, I found a Polaroid of my sister and me on my 17th birthday. My belly just starting to show under a blouse with cherries. Carl is in the background, his hand on the doorframe, his gaze not on the cake, but on me. I sat on the edge of the bed with the photo pinched in my fingers until my vision cleared. There are moments when fear becomes a kind of fuel. I took a plastic sandwich bag from the drawer, the kind with a zipper, and slid it into my purse. Then I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies with too many raisins and drove to my sister's house. Carl answered the door. "Well, look who finally remembered us," he said, the same performative cheer he's had his whole life. "We're not dead yet." He took a cookie, bit into it, and crumbs fell into his palm. "You always overbake," he said. "It's your fatal flaw." He put the half-eaten cookie on a napkin and went to get plates. My hands didn't shake when I folded the napkin and tucked it into my purse. I didn't accuse him then. I poured coffee and asked about his knees and listened to him use the word legacy, like a man polishing trophies no one else wants. My sister stayed upstairs. I could hear drawers opening and closing. When I left, Carl patted my shoulder and said, "Don't make trouble, Lena. You've always had a dramatic streak." I smiled the way women smile when they are memorizing a room. The lab sent a result in 10 days. I walked out to the porch to open it because I wanted the sky to see me. The numbers were complicated, but the conclusion was written plain. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. For an hour, I did nothing. I watched 2 boys ride scooters past my house, and a woman push a stroller and a man jog shirtless, because some people do that even in November. Then I went inside and called my son. "I have something," I said. I couldn't wait. The silence on the line didn't feel like distance. It felt like breath held in a dark theater before the lights change. When I told him, he didn't shout. He didn't say an ugly word. He sat with it the way people in our family have always sat with hard things, composed, private, hurting under the ribs. "I need to see him," he said, meaning the man who raised him, the man who was his father twice over. And her. We agreed to go together. I asked my neighbor, Marta, to sit near her window that evening. "Red sweater means call," I told her. "Blue means everything's fine." She made a face. "Who wears red for subtlety?" I said nothing. She hugged me and put a charger in my purse. My sister opened the door before we rang. She looked small and pale without her makeup, cardigan buttoned wrong. The picture frame on the entry table had a photo of my son's baby, rosy and asleep. For a second, I wanted to fall to my knees and put my cheek on the glass. I steadied myself and walked in. Carl was at the table, arms crossed. He didn't stand. He looked at my son, and something moved under his skin like a fish in shallow water. "You made a big mistake bringing him here," he said to me, as if my son were furniture. "We could have handled this quietly." My son pulled out a chair and sat. "Dad," he said, and the words split in the air between them like a pane of glass. "Did you know?" My sister sat down across from me. "Carl," she said softly, almost like a prayer. He stared at the wall. Then he laughed once through his nose. "I knew she'd make everything about her," he said, jerking his head toward me. "I told you, dramatic." I put the napkin on the table and slid the lab report on top. "This is not dramatic," I said. "This is measurable." My sister reached for it, and then pulled her hand back like it burned. My son didn't touch it. He looked at Carl like a man who had just realized he'd been speaking another language his whole life. Carl's shoulders slumped as if someone untied a knot inside him. "It was a mistake," he said. "It was a one-time thing." He said thing like it was a storm or a pothole. My sister made a sound I didn't know she could make. I saw the truth click into place for her too. A puzzle solved so long after the picture stopped mattering. She turned her face toward me, and for a second I thought she would say the one thing that could make me forgive her. She didn't. She said, "If you had kept your mouth shut." Kept my mouth shut. My voice rose and then steadied. "You built a life on a stolen child and a stolen lie. You walked me through your baby's aisle and put my hands on a stroller I paid for and never got to push." I put my palms flat on the table. "How many times did you hand me my son and call it kindness?" Carl rubbed his eyes like he had a headache and not a confession. "It was complicated," he said. Your mother insisted. We were going to lose everything if people knew. My mother is gone, I said. Her insistence can't sign forms now. You're the father. She's the thief. I'm the mother. I looked at my sister. She had her hands clasped like a child about to say grace. You could have told me any time, after your second miscarriage, when he had the flu and cried for you all night, when I taught him to drive. You could have told me then. She shook her head, tiny movements like she was arguing with a memory. He needed a home, she said. We gave him one. You would have, what, raised a baby in your bedroom? Dropped out of life? I would have raised my son, I said, and I would have loved him more than I fear gossip. The rest of that night is a blur of voices and old grievances awakening like bats. We didn't resolve anything, but I walked out with one thing I didn't have before. Their silence, the kind that means confession has stripped a house. On the porch, my son said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He wiped his face with his sleeve like a boy. But I know what I'm not going to do anymore, and that's pretend. My lawyer, Ms. Keating, is 20 years younger than me and has a calm face people confess to. She read the lab report, the hospital papers, the signed affidavit from the nurse I tracked down, a woman named Grace who remembered our last name because we brought her cherry jam at Christmas. Your mother and sister took advantage of the fact that you were a minor, she said. They misrepresented the adoption. There's a trail. We can petition to amend the birth record and to charge fraud. Criminal charges are unlikely given the years, but civil? Yes. And we can put a mirror in front of every place in this town that enabled it. Do we need to burn it all down? I asked. Or just the rotten parts? She smiled with half her mouth. Rot travels, she said. You decide how far you want the ash to go. I thought about church pews and casseroles, about women who had stood in my kitchen and told me my pies were too tart, and my skirts too tight, and my grief too long. I thought about girls whose names I didn't know, girls who still sign things they don't understand, because someone with a wedding ring tells them to. I thought about my son, who wanted the truth without the ruin. What kind of mother would I be if I didn't make a path he could walk without cutting his feet? We filed the petition quietly. The clerk at the courthouse wore a cardigan the color of beets and treated the documents like living things. Grace, the nurse, gave a deposition in a room that smelled like copy paper. She remembered being told by our mother to handle the paperwork fast. She remembered my hand reaching and someone moving it back under the blanket. I still think about that, she said, looking at her hands. I shouldn't have let them rush me. My sister declined to give a statement. Carl sent one sentence through his lawyer. I deny any wrongdoing. The hearing was set for a Thursday in early spring. On Wednesday, a church friend called to tell me that my sister had asked the Women's Committee to pray against slander. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my body needed a release valve. Then I put on a pot of soup and wrote my son a letter. I told him I would not read it aloud. I told him whatever happened in that courtroom, it would not define the ways he had been a good man in a hard world. He came to my house that evening. He brought his baby. She fell asleep on my chest with her mouth open the way babies do, as if the world was too much and too sweet. What if I lose them? He asked suddenly, meaning the people who raised him, meaning the shape of the only story he ever knew. You won't, I said. You'll set them down for a while. That's not the same as losing. He looked at me. How are you not angry all the time? He asked. I was, I said. Then I got tired. Anger is heavy. I needed my hands free. The courthouse had windows like thin blue veins and benches that made your back behave. Ms. Keating put a yellow legal pad on the table and tapped her pen twice. My sister sat across the aisle in a navy skirt, pearls too tight at her throat. Carl wore a suit he hadn't tailored since the 90s. My son sat behind me. I could hear him breathe. The judge, a woman with hair the color of nickel, listened without interrupting. When it was my turn, I stood and told the story the way you tell someone how a storm came over a hill. I didn't dramatize. Reality had done that for me. I described the clipboard, the cry I heard and didn't hold, the adoption that wasn't, the years of being aunt, the DNA match, the napkin, the numbers. I said my son's name aloud and felt the sound of it find a home in my mouth. Ms. Keating called Grace. She walked slowly to the stand, a small woman in a neat blazer, and when she said my name the way you say a prayer, I had to look at the floor. She spoke about procedure and lapse, about pressure from families in small towns, about the days when a girl's future was an institution everyone populated without signing in. She did not excuse herself. She simply told the truth and let it sit on the table. My sister's lawyer tried to paint a picture of generosity, a baby in need, a household ready. He used phrases like best interest and family unity, and we all did the best we could. Ms. Keating asked him to show the adoption decree. He shuffled papers like a man looking for a rabbit in a hat that never existed. Carl didn't testify. His lawyer said the paternity test was flawed because the chain of custody was informal. The judge looked over her glasses and asked if there was any reason to doubt the numbers beyond discomfort. He did not answer. When it ended, the judge took a long breath. "We do not always get to undo what was done in private," she said. "But we can say, on the record, what was true. I find sufficient evidence that Ms. Alina Moran," she used my full name, the one on my marriage license, "is the biological mother of Mr. Lucas Grant. I grant the petition to amend the original birth certificate to reflect this fact. As to any further civil remedy, we will schedule a conference." She looked at my sister. "There are harms the law can weigh, and harms it can only witness." I did not cry until I was in the hallway, and then I wrapped my arms around my ribs and let my body shake like a leaf in the first wind of fall. My son put his hand on the back of my neck, the way you comfort a child waking from a bad dream. "Mom," he said. Just that. The sound of it moved through me like light through glass. And for a moment I couldn't breathe because I was alive too suddenly. News travels in a town like ours, the way sound travels under a lake, quiet and everywhere. The church didn't call me. The women's committee stopped asking me to bring deviled eggs. A girl from my quilting circle brought me lilies and said her granddaughter was pregnant and scared. "I told her to call you," she said. "You'll know what to say." My sister sent me a note with 10 lines of scripture and 1 line of apology. It read like a woman making a list. I wrote back that I was not the judge. I told her I would not stand in the way of my son seeing her if he wanted to. I told her I wanted a fence around my yard and my sanity, and that I was done pretending we were a family who told the truth when we did not. Carl left town 2 months later. He took a job in another state selling insurance to strangers. My son did not go to the farewell barbecue. He met me at the park instead, and we watched his daughter try to eat a leaf. "Do you think he'll ever be sorry?" he asked. "He will be busy," I said. Busy is some men's version of sorry. There was one more thing I needed to do, and I did it on a Sunday when clouds stacked like laundry. I drove to the cemetery where the stone with my parents' names sits under a maple. I took off my gloves and put my hands flat on the cold granite. I forgave you when I was 17 because I thought that was what daughters did, I said. I forgive you now because I need the space. A wind came and moved the tree, and the leaves sounded like 1,000 small agreements. I didn't burn my sister's life down. I let light into the rooms. It did its own work. She stopped leading the women's Bible study. She started attending a support group for people who had built their lives on other people's losses. We spoke sometimes at holidays, careful and quiet, like people crossing a new bridge one at a time. I did not hug her long. I didn't owe that to anyone anymore. On my next birthday, my son brought me a cake from the bakery with the sugar roses that always looked too real. His daughter stood on a chair to watch me blow out the candles and clapped when the smoke curled. "Make a wish," he said, and I laughed because the wish was already sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee. Later, when the house was quiet, I took the amended birth certificate out of the envelope and ran my finger over my name. It was a small thing to anyone else, paper and ink. To me, it was a map redrawn, the river set back where it always belonged. I put it in the cigar box where I keep the hard evidence of living. Funeral programs, love notes, ultrasound photos, grocery lists on which my late husband wrote, "Call me when you're done." Then I turned out the light. If you ask me whether revenge is sweet, I'll tell you it's something else. It's steady. It's a woman putting one foot in front of the other until the ground under her belongs to her again. It's telling the truth in a room that has been furnished with lies and letting the truth sit, heavy and undeniable, until everyone has to rearrange their chairs. It's hearing your grown son say "Mom," and knowing the word is not stealing anything from anyone. It is simply going home. Sometimes my sister calls in the afternoon and asks how my garden grows. I tell her the tomatoes are stubborn and I am learning patience with pruning. Sometimes she says she saw a child at the store with eyes like winter water, and we both go quiet because there's a name at the center of that silence now. Then we hang up. We go on. We are not who we were, and that is the mercy. One Saturday in late summer, my son and his family came over with a sapling tree. "For your yard," he said. "It's a willow. They bend, but they don't break." We dug the hole together. His daughter dropped a small plastic horse into the dirt and declared it a wish. We laughed, real laughter that didn't hurt on the way out. When we finished, I pressed the soil around the trunk with my hands, palms dirty, heart quiet. I stood and shaded my eyes. The sapling's leaves made the smallest music in the wind. In a few years, it will be big enough to sit under. And someone will say, "Where did this come from?" And I'll say, "From a hard season that turned soft, from a truth that took its time, from a woman who stopped asking permission to love her own child." We walked inside and made sandwiches and cut them diagonally because that's how children think love is supposed to look. When they left, my son hugged me in the doorway without hesitation. "See you Tuesday," he said. Tuesday. Not someday. Not when the dust settles. Tuesday, like a promise so ordinary it feels like a miracle. Later, when the light slid out of the kitchen and the willow cast its first thin shadow on the grass, I sat at the table and wrote 3 names on an index card. Mine, my son's, my granddaughter's. I set it beside the salt. A woman can forgive and still remember. A woman can be gentle and still be unshakable. I have learned that the long way. But the long way gets you there all the same. So if you ask how it all happened, I'll tell you this. The truth, knockseat, I opened the door. And when the wind came in and toppled the neat stacks of falsehoods we'd lived by, I did not pick them up. I let them lie where they fell, and I swept, and I made room for the kind of life that doesn't require anyone to call me anything I am not. I am his mother. I always was. The morning after the ruling, my phone lit up with numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters wanted a quote. The church wanted silence. I brewed coffee and let everything ring. When the machine finally picked up, I heard a woman clear her throat and say she was a social worker, retired now, and that she had read the docket notice in the paper. Your name is familiar, she said. We saw a lot of girls from your county. I always wondered about what happened to their babies. She left her number. I wrote it on the back of an envelope and stared at the thin blue ink until it bled into the fibers. I called her after lunch. Her name was Mrs. D'Angelo. She remembered the hospital's old wing and the way the night shift ran on coffee and fear. There was a volunteer who handled special cases, she said. She talked to parents in the hallway and took signatures in the chapel. Petite woman, hard eyes. People deferred to her. I knew before I asked. My mother had always been petite, and people had always deferred to her. Do you want to meet? She asked. I kept my notebooks. We met at the library, neutral ground with posters about literacy and a bulletin board full of babysitters and piano lessons. She brought 2 spiral notebooks with bent corners. Names filled the pages, first names only, dates, whether a pastor had visited, whether a family member was present. I recognized 3 girls from my old bus route. Some of those babies were placed legally, she said. Some were directed. She tapped the margin where my sister's name appeared in cramped pencil. This one, she said softly, had a husband with friends. Friends. The euphemism hung there like damp cloth. I took photos of every page, my hands steady as if they belonged to someone else. Before we left, I wrote down 5 numbers. I can't promise I'm the right person to call you, I told her, but I can promise I'll answer. I didn't start a crusade. I started a coffee date, then another. We met on Thursdays in the back room of a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and yeast, and we talked without the choreography of shame. There was Ella, who carried a son 9 months and was told he'd gone to a good family in another state. She later learned the other state was 3 miles down the road. There was Ruth, who never signed anything at all, and yet her baby left the hospital without her. There was June, who had married an older man because the pastor said it was the godly solution. She flinched when a tray clattered in the kitchen. We called ourselves the Thursday Girls, even though some of us had grey hair and sore knees. When one cried, we waited. When another laughed, we let it wash over us. We took notes, not because we planned to sue the world, but because truth deserves a ledger. Carl heard about the meetings through the same grapevine that had fed us potluck and poison our whole lives. One evening I found my shed door open and footprints on the mulch. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. I installed motion lights. Marta, bless her nosy heart, purchased a whistle so loud it woke the birds. Let them be afraid of the dark for once, she said, turning the whistle over in her hand like a relic. The next twist came not with a bang, but a soft wheeze. My granddaughter developed hives at a picnic, angry welts marching up her arms. My son fumbled with a bottle of antihistamine. I looked at the rash and time folded. No, I said, taking the bottle. She needs the other one. I remembered my husband's nephew, the way his throat had closed after a bee sting, the vial in my sister-in-law's purse, the impossibly fast ambulance. I remembered the entry in my husband's family file, severe reaction to diphenhydramine. We went to the emergency room and came home. Later, sitting on the porch steps, my son said, "This is why the truth is so important. And I nodded, because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is know your blood. Ms. Keating set a date for the civil conference. "Discovery will be ugly," she said. "Prepare yourself." I said I was long past caring about ugly. I wanted accurate. Carl's lawyer sent a thick packet meant to intimidate. Subpoenas for my diaries, for the Thursday girls' notes, for every photograph I had ever taken of a cake with blue icing. We narrowed the scope. "He wants your silence," Miss Keating said, "not your story." Depositions are less dramatic than television promised me, but they are tighter, more intimate, like being cross-examined by memory itself. My sister didn't look at me. She looked at the stenographer as if we were all just a story someone else would type up. When Ms. Keating asked who had suggested the in-family adoption, she said, "It was presented as the only decent option." Presented by whom? Mother. Who signed the hospital discharge? Mother. Who held the baby before I did? Silence. Then, small. Carl. Carl swaggered into his deposition as if there were bleachers. He wore his ring on a chain under his shirt, the way men do when they want to look like they've learned a lesson without absorbing it. His lawyer objected to nearly every question. Still, enough slipped through. Yes, he had accompanied my sister to meetings with the hospital volunteer. Yes, he had been present when I signed consent in the chapel. Yes, he had driven my sister home with a bassinet already in the back seat. "Did you have sexual relations with Ms. Moran prior to her pregnancy?" Ms. Keating asked. Object overruled. He stared at a spot just over my left shoulder, as if the truth could be found by squinting at drywall. "Once," he said. The word dropped and rolled and kept rolling until it hit my sister's feet. She didn't pick it up. The pastor came up then, as I knew he would. He had been our family's referee for decades, moving people around the board of righteousness with a gentle hand and a firm wrist. He wrote a letter for the court full of Bible verses and passive voice. Mistakes were made, hearts were heavy, the community sought restoration. Ms. Keating quietly introduced a photocopy of a check to the hospital's benevolence fund, signed by my mother and countersigned by the pastor. There was no benevolence fund in the hospital records. The judge's eyebrow lifted 1 millimeter. It was enough. I didn't sleep much that month. I baked at odd hours, and the freezer filled with muffins no one could possibly eat. On a Tuesday at 3 a.m., I saw headlamps sweep across my living room ceiling and a truck idle in front of my house. It stayed 3 minutes and drove off. The next morning I found a note in my mailbox, printed letters cut from a magazine like a child's idea of menace. "Go quiet, or lose him again." I called Ms. Keating. She called the police. Marta moved her lawn chair to her porch and took up knitting as if it were surveillance. Fear did not keep me home. It sent me to places where walls could listen. I made an appointment with the new hospital administrator, a woman with a sharp bob and a sharper mind. I brought the notebooks and the check copy and a polite smile. "I don't want a scandal," I said. "I want a reckoning." She surprised me by taking both of my hands. "You will have one," she said, "from the inside." She started an internal audit that turned up 6 files with signatures that looked like mine. Same pen, same chain, same chapel. The volunteer had long since passed. The policy changed. The harm remained. The settlement talks crept like ivy. Carl wanted peace without price. My sister wanted absolution without admission. Ms. Keating wanted numbers that changed more than a ledger. I wanted a fund for girls who needed lawyers, when everyone else wanted prayers. We negotiated across a long table, while a clock ticked in a restful, infuriating way. After weeks of back and forth, an agreement took shape, a public statement acknowledging fraud, a scholarship administered by the new hospital for young mothers, reimbursement of my legal fees, and a donation to the Thursday Girls pro bono account. Carl would step down from the board of the Little League where he had been a king of Saturdays. My sister would resign her leadership of the women's ministry and attend, not instruct. Before we signed, I added one condition. I want an apology, I said, to my son, in words he can hold, not a statement crafted by a lawyer. Carl rolled his eyes. My sister nodded, slow as Thor. I can write, she said. I can try. The letter arrived a week later, handwritten, each line a careful bridge over a ravine. She did not flatter herself. She did not blame the era. She wrote, I made a home out of what never belonged to me and asked you to be grateful for the theft. She wrote, I loved you as if love could erase the first lie. She wrote, I will spend the rest of my life making room for the truth, even when it costs me the story I used to tell about myself. My son read it at my table and put his hand over the page as if to keep the words from blowing away. Not every story in town ended with letters and funds. Two men cornered June in the grocery store and told her God had forgiven, and so should she. Marta happened to be in the pickle aisle and treated them to a speech so blistering the jars might have boiled. Ella's grown son refused to meet her. He wasn't ready. Ruth found her daughter but learned she had died years before of an infection that a mother might have recognized sooner. We sat with Ruth in the bakery, breathing with her like women in a labor room, blessings spoken in the strange language of grief. Our Thursday group grew until we needed the church basement, no irony wasted. The pastor tried to reclaim the space with a devotion at the beginning. We told him thank you, and no. We set up folding chairs and a pot of coffee, and a table for records. We invited a legal aid attorney and a trauma counselor, and a woman who taught people how to read court forms without flinching. Sometimes we just listened. Sometimes someone brought a box of old photos, and we passed them like precious contraband. I kept my Tuesdays with my son. We developed a rhythm, groceries, playground, a walk by the river, stories we told and stories we set aside for later. One afternoon he said, I feel disloyal when I call you Mom, and disloyal when I don't. I told him he could call me Lena, Mum, Mother, Friend, the woman who carries too many snacks, whatever made his mouth and heart agree. You don't owe me a name, I said. You owe yourself peace. Spring slipped into summer. The willow we planted unfurled longer, bolder leaves. My granddaughter learned to say my name with both syllables, as if she were counting them like treasure. The lawsuit concluded with signatures and a press release that used the word accountability and meant it for once. The hospital launched the fund with a simple ceremony. No balloons, just a row of chairs and a small plaque that read, For those who were told, silence was holy. Carl didn't come to the ceremony. He had already left. A rumor said he volunteered with a men's group in his new town, teaching boys how to be leaders. Another said he was selling annuities by phone because no one wanted to see him in person. My sister came, though. She sat 2 rows behind me and left before the coffee. I found a folded note on my windshield afterward. I'm trying. Some days I don't know who I am without the lie. I took the note home and put it in the cigar box between the birth certificate and a photograph of me at 17, hand on a belly I wasn't allowed to claim. If there is a second act to a woman's life, it is not made of grand gestures. It is a litany of small decisions made out loud. I answered calls at odd hours. I drove to meet a girl behind the gas station because she didn't want to be seen going into the clinic, and sat with her in the car while she called her aunt. I went to a school board meeting and read a prepared statement requesting that the health class include real information about consent and resources. And when a man stood up to say this would ruin the innocence of our children, 5 women stood up behind me and stared him into sitting. The twist I didn't expect came in a brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a ledger, the kind you buy at a hardware store, with columns ruled in pale blue. In my mother's tight handwriting were dates and names and amounts, the euphemisms of an empire: donation, benevolence, gratitude. Next to several names were initials: P.S., the pastor; C.G., Carl; A.M., my own initials. Next to an entry that made me sit down: return, stroller. She had kept accounts not just of money, but of morality, little tallies of who owed what, for whose silence. At the back, in a different pen, a list labelled future: girls who were 13, 14, girls who had smiled too brightly at potlucks and left early with headaches. Some names had a check mark, some had a small star. I took the ledger to Ms. Keating. She breathed out and then in, slow. "This is not just your story," she said. "This is an archive of harm." We made copies. We locked the original in her office safe. We gave one copy to the hospital administrator. We gave another to a reporter we trusted, a woman who had covered our Thursday group without turning us into content. The paper ran a series over 6 Sundays, each story sober and bright, like morning light in a clean kitchen. The pastor resigned. A task force formed, the kind that makes people roll their eyes until they see the list of women appointed to it. Some folks said we were tearing the town apart. I said we were taking the nails out of old boards so the house wouldn't collapse on our daughters. There was one last room in the house I had not opened, and it was the one that held my sister and me side by side without our mother's shadow. She asked to come over. I made tea and a plate of crackers, because food is sometimes the only language we share. She sat in my mother's old chair and did not touch the arms. "I had a dream last night," she said without preface. "We were 12 and 5 again, and you were hiding under the table, and I told you I'd protect you. I woke up and realized I never did." She folded her hands. "I don't know how to be your sister now." I thought about the ledger and the letters, about the Thursdays in the bakery and the Tuesdays by the river, about my son's careful embrace and my granddaughter's untroubled laugh. "You could start by telling the truth without defending it," I said. "You could stop trying to be loved for the things you took." She nodded, tears standing in her eyes. "I can do that," she said. "I can try to do that." We spoke a long time, unspooling a thread that had been knotted so long it had learned to live crooked. She told me about her miscarriages, her fear of being left by a man who only felt gentle when the world applauded him, the way our mother's approval had been a ration and not a feast. I told her about 17 and the chapel and the sound of a baby I didn't hold. I did not forgive her in that moment the way people do in movies. I did something harder. I told her we could build a relationship that did not rely on either of us pretending we were someone else. We leave doors open now between rooms that used to be locked. She comes to some Thursday meetings and sits in the second row and listens to other women say what she once refused to hear. She doesn't speak unless invited. When invited, she says, "I wronged someone I loved because I wanted to be someone I wasn't. I am trying to learn how not to do that again." It's not catchy. It's not a verse. It's enough. As for me, I have learned that revenge, properly understood, is not the opposite of forgiveness. It is the opposite of forgetting. It is a ledger made honest. It is a grandmother making sure the next girl who sits in a hospital bed with a pen on a chain knows there is a number in her pocket, other than the one for the chapel. It is the quiet pleasure of hearing your name used exactly right by the person who once had to pretend you didn't exist. On the anniversary of the day I signed the wrong paper, the Thursday girls gathered under the willow. We brought photos and the names we had, and a bell we rang for the names we didn't. My son came with his daughter, who chased light on the grass. We spoke aloud the truths we had pried loose from stubborn walls. When the wind lifted, the leaves shook like applause. After everyone left, I sat by the new tree a while longer. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who believed adults always knew what was best, the one who looked at the chain on the pen and thought it was there to keep the pen from getting lost, not to tether her to someone else's story. I wanted to tell her we made it here, to a place where no one hands us cake and theft in the same breath, and calls it celebration. I wanted to tell her that the women she would meet along the way would put a hand on her back and say, "Keep walking, the ground is yours." So we walk. On Tuesdays, on Thursdays, on ordinary days, with groceries and dentist appointments and school pickups. We walk past the church and wave to the new pastor, a woman with laugh lines who does not try to take our stories from us to make a sermon. We wave to the hospital administrator. We wave to the girls sitting on the library steps. And when they look back, they see women who have stopped being afraid of their own names. If you want a neat ending, you won't find it here. What you will find is a kitchen with a clean table, and a ledger with true numbers, and a willow that grows the way truth grows, slow, insistent, bending, and never breaking. What you will find is a woman, 72 and unafraid, who knows how to turn a match in her fingers and decide whether to strike it, and who has learned that the best fires are the ones that keep a house warm without burning it down. And because stories like mine were once made in secret, I will end this part in the open. My name is Alina Moran. I am the mother of a good man. I am the grandmother of a fierce girl. I am the sister of a woman who is learning to tell the truth. And I am the keeper of a ledger that now finally balances.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.